Everyone. So by now you should have all watched the Disney Illusion video that was posted before, but I just wanted to talk a little bit more on some of the things that were mentioned in that video and tell you how to spot an illusion. Okay, so just to review, illusions are an expression designed to call something to mind without mentioning it explicitly. So it's an indirect or a passing reference. Okay, so some more review from the last video. Some of the common types of illusions that were mentioned are references to mythology, religion, history, pop culture, literature, and art, and significant people and events. And we actually saw examples of almost all of these common types of illusions in A Raisin in the Sun. So let's take a moment and look at those. Okay, so examples from A Raisin in the Sun. Mythology. Think about the time when George Murchison calls Walter Prometheus. We also have references to religion, which ironically are usually made by Beneatha, the atheist of the group, such as when she compares Mr. Linder's offer to 30 pieces and not a coin less, which is a biblical reference to Judas. They also mention a lot of history. These are just a few. But for example, when Mama talks about lynching and she's kind of referencing that Jim Crow era South, or also the founding of Liberia, which happened after the slaves were liberated. And then we also have a lot of references to literature. Most importantly, the title, A Raisin in the Sun, which is a reference to the poem that we all read. And then there are also some references to some historical people. So think back to when Mrs. Johnson comes in and she's having that big argument over the capabilities of African Americans. And she mentioned someone called Booker T. Washington. So he was a really big name in America at the time. And so she's referencing him, and it's assumed that people at that time would understand what she was talking about and know who he was. So now that we've looked at some examples of illusions, we want to think about why authors use illusions. In short, illusions connect the text to the larger world. They can deepen our understanding of the characters, themes, and events of a text. Illusions are a wonderful poetic device, but it can also be the hardest one to identify because it relies on knowledge outside of the text. So what do we do if we don't get the reference an illusion is making? So like the narrator in that previous video mentioned, if you don't catch on to the illusion, it's not the end of the world. We all have different backgrounds and experiences. What might seem like common knowledge to one person may be completely foreign to another, and that's honestly a wonderful thing. But because illusions can really enhance our understanding of a text, we want to try our hardest to understand them when we can. So even if we don't always get the reference, there are some ways we can try and recognize that someone is making an illusion. This isn't foolproof. Some references are so subtle that the only way to know it's an illusion is to be familiar with what the author is referencing. Other times, however, you may notice something is an illusion without always knowing what it's an allusion to. So here are some tips on how to recognize if something might be an illusion. So if the author suddenly starts using quotes, and it's not surrounding dialogue, where the characters are talking to one another, this might be a sign that it's an illusion, because they may be quoting someone or something else. The same goes for the sudden use of italics. So italics can signal a whole bunch of things. It can also be used for dialogue sometimes, or for flashbacks or inner thoughts. But if these haven't been being used before and italics suddenly appear, that might indicate that that's an illusion. Also, if a new name, place, or event is mentioned without any explanation, that might be a sign that it's an illusion. If they don't feel the need to explain it, it might be because they think we'll already know or understand what it is that they're referencing. Also, if a character's name seems really odd or kind of familiar, that might be a sign that the character's name could be an illusion. Also, if an author or a character or a speaker suddenly changes tone or diction, that's a good sign that it could be an illusion, because that change in tone or diction might show that they're quoting or citing someone else. So let's look at a few examples of how you might be able to recognize allusions, even if you don't get the reference. So, here's one to start. The poem Out Out by Robert Frost. Ignore the poem part and let's just look at the title. So notice that out out is in quotations. So the use of quotations here is signaling to us that it's a quote. And what it's a quote from is Macbeth. But even if you haven't read Macbeth, just seeing those quotation marks might signal that this is an allusion. Or in this excerpt from Emma by Jane Austen. There does seem to be a something in the air of Hartfield which gives love exactly the right direction and sends it into the very channel where it ought to flow. And then we have this space down and in italics, the course of true love never did run smooth. So even if you've never read A Midsummer Night's Dream and you've never heard that line before, the fact that it's set apart from the rest of the text, it's in italics, and it has different tone and diction than the rest of the text, might signal that this is an allusion. So let's look at a few more examples. So here's an excerpt from a poem by Robert Frost. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. So take a look in that second line at this reference to Eden, as in the Garden of Eden. Now, a lot of people may already be familiar with the fact that this is a biblical reference. But even if you're not, we might be able to tell that this is an allusion because it's capitalized. So Eden being capitalized tells us that this is probably a proper noun. So again, this is a person or a place that is popping up in a poem without any explanation. So it might be assumed that this is a reference that we'll know and understand, that they're trying to make an allusion here. So, another example, one that you should all be familiar with, because it's from a poem that we read last week, Blackberry Picking by Seamus Heaney. So, with thorn pricks are palms sticky as bluebeards. So, Bluebeard here is an allusion to a French fairy tale character. So, in the fairy tale, you don't need to know the whole story, but basically he murders a bunch of people, and his hands are gross and covered in blood, and it's nasty. So that's the image that's being evoked here when he says our palms are as sticky as bluebeards. But even if you don't know that fairy tale, we might be able to tell again that this is a proper noun because it's being capitalized here and it also has that possessive S on it. So that might cue us to realize that this might be a person that we're talking about. And it's a person who's not being explained or referenced again. So it might be that allusion. So let's look at a few more examples. Here's an excerpt from a poem by Robert Frost. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. So if we take a look in that second line at this reference to Eden. So this is a reference to the Bible, Garden of Eden, but even if you've never heard of it, the fact that Eden here is capitalized signals to us that this is a proper noun. So it's either a person or a place. And that can tell us, because it's a proper noun, and it's not being explained anywhere else, that this might be an allusion. So another example of this, one that you should all be familiar with, because we read it last week, Blackberry Picking, Seamus Heaney, with thorn pricks are palms sticky as bluebeards. So this is a reference to a French fairy tale. But even if you have never heard of that fairy tale, again, the fact that Bluebeard here is being capitalized and it's got that possessive S tells us that it's probably a person. And it's a person who's being used in a simile and then not explained later on. So this is a good indicator that this is an allusion, even if you've never read that fairy tale. So, an example of that character names. So when a character's name seems either odd or familiar. So if you've ever read The Fault in Our Stars or watched it, good movie, good book, just great all around. You might recognize this character down here, so Augustus. So Augustus's name is actually an allusion to the first Roman emperor. And this name, Augustus, relates back to another allusion in that story, which is the title, The Fault in Our Stars, which is a quote from Julius Caesar by Shakespeare, which is, of course, set in Roman times. But again, even if you don't know who Augustus is, or you've never read Julius Caesar, you can guess that this name is probably an illusion because it's a very strange name for a 17-year-old character in modern times to have. So the fact that this name is so strange and so out of place in the story might signal to us that this name is an allusion to something else. All right, so these are a few ways that you might be able to guess if something is an illusion. And again, no biggie if you don't get the reference. But if you think that something might be an illusion, look it up. And you just might deepen your understanding of the text and learn something new. So that's pretty much it from me for today, but let me know if you have any questions about illusions. I know that this is one of the tougher poetic devices, which is why I wanted to make this video for you. But if you have any questions, please email me, lasargent@sarsd.org. It's on Google Classroom too, if you don't know my email. But yeah, have a great day.